The silence of Sector 289 was a lie, a carefully curated emptiness polished by the Vex Concordat and sold as peace by the Galactic Federation. Anya Sharma knew this better than anyone. From her cramped alcove in the underbelly of Station Epsilon, a forgotten rust bucket locals called the Sink, she could feel the lie in the recycled air that hummed with a permanent metallic tang and tasted of weary resignation. She wasn't a soldier. She had never held a plasma rifle or felt the gut-wrenching shudder of a ship under fire. Her weapons were quieter, her battlefields woven from light and logic. For 10 years, she'd been a data archivist for the Federation's Colonial Oversight Committee, a job whose bland title belied its grim reality. She was a digital mortician, cataloging the slow, bureaucratic death of humanity's fringe worlds. She watched from a distance as supply convoys were rerouted, terraforming projects defunded, and distress calls downgraded to low-priority maintenance requests, all to appease the Vex, the sleek, insectoid species that had won the last war, not with a bang, but with a trade agreement. Humans weren't conquered, they were made irrelevant, a junior partner in their own galaxy, and the Sink was where the irrelevant came to rust. Tonight, however, the lie of the quiet sector was about to break on the triple-locked, ghost-encrypted datapad resting on her lap. Anya had found the truth, buried under layers of diplomatic jargon and coded legalese. It wasn't a memo or a report. It was a protocol, a final solution coded with the deceptively gentle name Project Sundown. It was a Federation directive outlining the managed decommissioning of 17 outlying human colonies. It was a death sentence written in the passive, sterile language of corporate restructuring. They wouldn't be bombed or invaded. They would simply be starved, cut off from the hyperlane networks, their atmospheric processors allowed to fail, their medical supplies left undelivered until the last heartbeat faded into the uncaring void. It was a quiet, orderly genocide designed to cede the territory to the Vex without the messy optics of a forced evacuation. The names on the list were places she had processed data for New Canaan, Promise, Horizon's Gate. They were home to millions of people who still believed the Federation was their protector. That belief was the first casualty. Her fingers, thin and stained with synthink, hovered over the datapad. Rage was a useless hot emotion. What she felt was something colder, a clarity so sharp it hurt. She couldn't save those colonies, not alone, not with a public leak that the Federation's vast propaganda machine would instantly brand as seditious forgery. You couldn't fight an empire with a press release, but you could give the empire a new enemy. She slipped the datapad into a shielded sleeve and navigated the grimy, dripping corridors of the Sink, her worn boots making no sound on the grated flooring. The station was a vertical slum, a stack of repurposed asteroid mining modules where the only law was gravity and the only hope was a ticket out. She found Elias Vance in his usual spot, a dingy bar called The Void, where the booze was synthesized from hydroponic fungus and the clientele looked like they'd lost a fight with the future. Elias was a relic, a freighter captain from an era before automated shipping lanes and Vex-mandated compliance chips. His ship, the Nomad, was a hulking, ugly G-class hauler held together with unauthorized welds, stubborn ingenuity, and a thick layer of cosmic dust. He was a smuggler, a cynic, and the only person in the sector she trusted. He owed her. 2 years ago, she'd scrubbed his ship's identity from a customs database just as a Vex patrol was closing in, saving him from a lifetime in a penal asteroid mine. He saw her approach, and grunted, gesturing to the empty stool beside him. Anya, you only come down to this level when you need something heavy, moved, or something illegal broken. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. Which is it tonight? She slid onto the stool, the low thrum of the station's life support vibrating through the seat. I need a ride, she said, her voice low. Close to the Vex relay at Tartarus Point, Elias stopped swirling his drink, his face, a roadmap of bad decisions and narrow escapes. Tightened. Tartarus. That's not just Vex territory. That's their private chapel. They shoot anything that isn't broadcasting the right hymns. What's out there that's worth that kind of risk? Anya placed the datapad on the sticky bar top. A message, she said. She didn't show him the contents of Project Sundown. Knowing would make him an accomplice, and she was only cashing in a debt, not recruiting a martyr. It's a data packet. I need to upload it directly to their internal network. It has to look like it came from inside their own system. Elias stared at the datapad, then at her. He saw the cold fire in her eyes, the absence of fear that was more unnerving than any desperate plea. You're not just breaking a law, are you? This is something else. This is the kind of trouble that doesn't just get you arrested, it gets you erased. The debt. Elias, she said softly. I called it in. He let out a long, slow breath, the air whistling through his teeth. He downed his drink in one swallow, the glass clanking as he set it down. Fine, but if we see so much as a Vex antenna twitched the wrong way, I'm jumping, and you're cleaning up your own mess. Fuel and supplies are your problem. Be at Bay 77 in 3 hours. The Nomad was even uglier on the inside. The bridge was a chaotic nest of exposed wiring, mismatched consoles, and the lingering smell of burnt ozone. It was a ship with a history. Every dent and flicker a memory of a crisis survived. As they drifted silently out of the sync's congested docking ring, Anya worked, her fingers a blur across a custom-built interface jury-rigged into the ship's comm system. She wasn't just preparing to transmit Project Sundown. She was meticulously altering it. She embedded ghost code, forged communication headers, and inserted linguistic markers specific to the Cathar, a rival Vex faction from the Outer Rim. She wove a new narrative into the protocol, transforming it from a simple Federation betrayal into a clandestine agreement between Federation officials and the Cathar. A secret pact to weaken the dominant Vex Concordat from within. It was a lie wrapped around a horrifying truth, a precisely engineered piece of chaos designed to make the Vex doubt their own rigid hierarchy. It was a poison pill for a predator. 5 minutes to the relay's proximity zone. Elias's voice crackled over the internal comm. Sensors are cold, but I don't like it. It's too quiet. Quiet is what we need, Anya replied, her focus absolute. The relay at Tartarus Point was a stunning piece of Vex architecture, a lattice of crystalline silver that spun slowly in the void, catching the light of a distant nebula. It was beautiful, arrogant, and bristling with layers of security she had spent months studying. Bypassing them was like performing neurosurgery with a sledgehammer. She had to be brutal, fast, and precise. She launched the first part of her attack, a cascade of junk data packets. Meaningless noise aimed at a specific diagnostic port she knew had a firmware flaw. The relay's automated defenses swarmed to contain the phantom threat, diverting processing power and attention. In that sliver of a second, she opened another channel, a back door into their primary comms buffer. I'm in. she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. The upload began, a torrent of poisoned information pouring into the heart of the Vex network. The progress bar on her screen crawled upwards 10%, 20, 40. It felt like an eternity. Anya. Elias's voice was sharp, laced with a new urgency. We've got company. Vex patrol cutter. Just dropped out of stealth 100 clicks off our stern. And they're not on any published patrol route. On the main viewport, a speck of light resolved into the sleek, predatory shape of a Vex ship. It was heading their way. 70%. Anya muttered, her fingers flying as she worked to compress the remaining data, pushing the Nomad systems to the point of overheating. They're hailing us. Standard identification request, Elias said, his hands already moving across the navigation controls, plotting jump coordinates he probably never wanted to use. Ignore it. Buy me seconds. They've locked weapons, he growled. They're not asking any more. The Nomad shuddered as a warning shot. A bolt of searing plasma streaked past the cockpit. 95%, Anya yelled. Almost there. Elias didn't wait for her to finish. He slammed his palm down on a large, unmarked button on his console, and the Nomad's engine screamed in protest. The ship lurched violently, throwing Anya against her restraints as it veered into a wild, unpredictable evasion pattern. The Vex cutter fired again, this time for effect. The bolt struck the Nomad's port side, and the ship groaned. A chorus of alarms shrieked through the bridge, and a shower of sparks rained down from a ruptured conduit. Upload complete, Anya screamed over the din. Get us out of here. Hold on. Elias roared, his face illuminated by the red glare of warning lights. He engaged the hyperdrive, a system never meant to be activated under such duress. The universe outside the viewport twisted, stars stretching into searing blades of light. The jump was brutal, a bone-jarring, metal-screaming transition that felt less like travel and more like being torn apart and reassembled molecule by molecule. They burst back into real space with a final, sickening lurch. The bridge was a wreck. The lights were out, save for the frantic strobing of emergency beacons. The air was thick with the acrid smell of fried electronics, and a deep, rhythmic clanging echoed from somewhere in the ship's wounded hull. They were alive. They were free. But they were lost. Adrift in an uncharted nebula. Their ship crippled. On Anya's console, a single green light pulsed steadily. A silent confirmation. The message had been sent. The spark had been lit. A tiny flame of rebellion in a vast, encroaching darkness. And now, the hunt would begin. The return to reality was a symphony of failure. Alarms blared in a dozen different discordant pitches, each one signaling a unique and catastrophic breakdown. The strobing red of emergency lighting painted the ruined bridge in rhythmic pulses of crimson and shadow, revealing twisted metal, shattered displays, and the fine, glittering dust of vaporized circuitry hanging in the air. The deep, guttural clang of damaged machinery was the only constant beat in the chaos, a slow, metallic heartbeat counting down the seconds to the Nomad's demise. Elias was a blur of motion, his body a tense knot of muscle and instinct as he wrestled with a console that was actively trying to kill him. He slammed his fist against a sparking panel, silencing one alarm only for two more to take its place. Life support was flickering, the pressure was dropping, and the ship's internal temperature was plummeting toward the absolute zero waiting just outside the hull. Status. He barked, his voice raw. Anya unclipped herself from her chair, her own console, a dead, blackened ruin. The little green light confirming her upload was gone, swallowed by the ship's systemic collapse. It didn't matter. The act was done. Now came the consequence. Main power is offline, running on emergency batteries that are draining at 17% per minute, she reported, her voice steady despite the shiver that ran through her. Her mind, accustomed to the clean logic of data streams, was now racing to process the brutal physics of their situation. Navigation is a ghost. Hyperdrive coil is melted. I think that's the technical term. Elias let out a string of curses that was creative even for him. He pulled a heavy wrench from a clip on the wall and pried open a floor panel, revealing a tangled nest of conduits. Forget the hyperdrive. If we can't stabilize the primary power loop, the batteries will die, the recyclers will shut down, and we'll be breathing vacuum in less than 10 minutes. Grab that fire suppression unit. We need to cool the reactor casing before it breaches. For the next 2 hours, they worked in a frantic, desperate ballet. There was no room for blame or recrimination, only the immediate, pressing reality of survival. Elias, with a lifetime's worth of hard-won mechanical knowledge, directed the chaos, shouting orders and pointing to conduits and relays that Anya, with her slender fingers and methodical precision, could reach. She rerouted power couplings, patched microfractures in the coolant lines with emergency sealant, and bypassed fried circuits with lengths of spare wire. They moved through the groaning, half-dead ship, a strange and unlikely team, the cynical smuggler who knew every bolt and weld of his vessel, and the quiet archivist who understood the flow of energy and logic that gave it life. The cold was their constant enemy, a creeping, insidious thing that seeped through the deck plates and made their tools stick to their gloves. By the time they managed to divert the last of the battery power into the life support and primary reactor coolant loop, they were exhausted, shivering, and covered in grease and grime. The ship fell silent. The alarms died. The strobing lights were replaced by a single, dim, steady glow, and the violent clanging from the engine room subsided into a low, pained hum. They had stabilized. They were alive, but they were a ghost ship in a dead sea of stars, a tiny, powerless island in an uncharted, swirling nebula whose beautiful clouds of gas and dust would just as surely kill them with radiation as a Vex torpedo. Elias collapsed into the pilot's seat, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "Well," he said, his voice raspy, "the good news is, we're not going to die in the next 5 minutes." He stared at the viewport, where the vivid colors of the nebula painted a scene of hostile beauty. "The bad news is, I have no idea where the hell we are, and no way to call for a tow." Anya leaned against a bulkhead, the cold metal a shock through her thin jumpsuit. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the cold, heavy weight of what she had done. She had ignited a war, a shadow war that would be fought in Vex council chambers and on Federation back channels, and the first casualties would be the Truth and the 17 colonies she had tried, in her own twisted way, to avenge. "We need to get the comms back online," she said. "Even a low-gain receiver. We need to know what's happening." It took another day of painstaking work. They cannibalized parts from the ruined navigation system and the ship's entertainment console, a relic that hadn't worked in years. Anya, guided by Elias's rough schematics, rewired the main comms dish, bypassing the fried amplifiers to create a makeshift short-range listening post. It was a crude setup, prone to static and interference from the nebula, but it was better than silence. On the third day since the jump, they heard it. It wasn't a Federation news broadcast or a civilian signal. It was a tight beam Vex military frequency, heavily encrypted and skipping across channels. Anya couldn't break the encryption, not with the limited processing power she had, but she could analyze the patterns, the metadata. The traffic was dense, chaotic, and it was all internal. Vex ships talking to other Vex ships with a panicked urgency that was utterly alien to their normally rigid and disciplined communications. She managed to isolate a few unencrypted fragments, keywords that slipped through the cracks. Cathar sleeper cells, quarantine protocol Zeta, purge of the third spine, Federation denial. Elias stood behind her, listening to the fragmented whispers of the chaos she had unleashed. He had been quiet since they'd stabilized the ship, his usual gruff cynicism replaced by a tense, watchful silence. Now, he finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Anya, you told me you were sending a message. You didn't tell me you were starting a goddamn civil war." She turned to face him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. She owed him more than a partial truth now. He wasn't just a pilot for hire, he was a co-conspirator, a fellow fugitive. She took out the datapad, the original, unedited Project Sundown file she had kept as a failsafe, and handed it to him. "This is what the Federation is doing," she said. "This is the message I sent." He took the pad and began to read. The silence on the bridge stretched, broken only by the hum of the ship's barely functioning systems and the faint, ghostly chatter of the Vex tearing themselves apart. His knuckles went white as he gripped the datapad. His face, usually a mask of detached irony, slowly hardened into a block of cold fury. He read about the supply cuts, the engineered famines, the silent, bureaucratic murder of millions of human beings. He was a smuggler, a man who lived his life in the gray margins of the law. But this was black. A darkness so absolute it swallowed all nuance. He finally looked up from the screen, his eyes boring into hers. 17 colonies, he whispered. They're just going to let them die. They call it decommissioning, Anya corrected softly. It sounds cleaner on the quarterly reports. Elias slowly lowered the datapad. The scale of her actions finally clicked into place for him. She hadn't just lashed out in anger. She'd performed a cold, calculated act of geopolitical sabotage. She hadn't tried to save the colonies with an appeal to mercy. She had tried to save them by making the territory so politically toxic, so embroiled in an internal Vex conflict, that the Federation's quiet handover would become impossible. She had traded one kind of war for another. "So you pointed them at each other," he said, a note of grudging awe in his voice. "You set their house on fire to keep them from taking ours." "Fire is all they understand," she replied. "Now, they'll be too busy purging their own ranks and securing their borders to worry about a few remote human colonies. It buys them time. Maybe enough time for the truth to matter." He let out a humorless laugh and ran a hand over his face. "And us. What does it buy us? Every Vex ship in the quadrant will be hunting for the source of this Cathar leak, and the Federation will be hunting for the source of the Sundown leak. We're at the top of 2 different kill lists. We need to disappear. Permanently." He walked over to the navigation console, its main screen still dark, and activated a secondary, independent system powered by its own small battery. A dusty, three-dimensional star chart flickered to life. "There's a place," he said, his fingers tracing a path through the star map. "It's not on any official charts." It was a deep space comms relay station during the initial expansion. Relay Station 734, when the Federation pulled back, they decommissioned it, stripped it for parts, and left the husk behind. They call it the Echo. He zoomed in on a dense asteroid field. It's here, hidden in the Charybdis Belt. It's a ghost town, home to deserters, wanted men, and people who just want to be left alone. If we can get there, we can get the parts to fix the Nomad, and no one will look for us in a place that doesn't officially exist. Getting there was the problem. Their main engines were shot, and the hyperdrive was slag. But the Nomad, in its stubborn refusal to die, had one last trick. It was equipped with a series of small, chemical-fueled thrusters meant for asteroid docking and fine maneuvering. They were slow, inefficient, and had a limited fuel supply. "We can't make a single jump," Elias explained, plotting a complex, stuttering course on the map. "But we can make 100 tiny ones, a series of sublight hops. We'll be exposed in real space 99% of the time, but if we stick to the nebula's densest pockets, maybe, just maybe, our sensor profile will be too faint to track." The journey to the Echo was a slow, nerve-wracking crawl through the cosmos. For weeks, they lived on recycled water and nutrient paste, their world shrinking to the confines of the damaged bridge. They floated through vast clouds of incandescent gas, past the skeletal remains of long-dead stars, their tiny ship a fragile speck in the immense, silent graveyard of space. Anya monitored their low-gain receiver, piecing together the galactic fallout from her actions. The Vex Concordat had gone dark, their borders sealed. Rumors on black market channels spoke of brutal purges, of entire fleets turning on each other, and of the Cathar faction, once a minor nuisance, now gaining surprising traction, backed by an unknown benefactor. The Federation, for its part, issued a formal condemnation of Vex aggression, playing the part of the concerned but helpless peacemaker, all while their internal security networks went into a frenzy, hunting for the leak. Project Sundown had vanished from their systems, scrubbed clean, but the damage was done. They were looking for a ghost. Finally, after a journey that felt like a lifetime, the Charybdis Belt appeared on their sensors, a chaotic jumble of rock and ice, and nestled in its heart, shielded from view by a particularly large asteroid, was Relay Station 734, the Echo. It was not a bustling port, it was a skeleton, a framework of rusting metal and dark, silent modules clinging to a central spine. A few dim lights glowed in scattered viewports, and a handful of equally dilapidated ships were clamped to its docking arms like parasites. It was a place at the end of the universe, a testament to forgotten promises. Elias sent a coded, low-energy docking request, an old smuggler's greeting. The reply was slow, a single, unadorned pulse of light. Permission granted. As the Nomad limped toward the station, its docking clamps groaning in protest, a new alert flashed on Anya's makeshift sensor board. It was faint, almost lost in the background radiation of the asteroid belt. But it was unmistakable. It was the energy signature of a ship dropping out of hyperspace, a clean, efficient jump, unlike their own violent rupture of space-time. Elias saw it too. Federation. He breathed, his blood running cold. That's a military-grade hyperdrive signature. The ship wasn't large, but its design was sleek and predatory, a deep, non-reflective black that absorbed the light. A Phantom-class scout ship. A hunter. It had no business being in an uncharted asteroid field. It hung in the darkness for a moment, silent and menacing. Then, a powerful comm signal, sharp and clear, cut through the silence of the sector, overriding the station's primitive systems. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. Unidentified vessel nomad. The voice was calm, synthesized, and utterly devoid of emotion. By the authority of the Galactic Federation internal security mandate, you are ordered to surrender. Power down your systems. Prepare to be boarded. Resistance is irrelevant. The Federation's voice, a sterile, synthesized monotone, hung in the frigid air of the Nomad's bridge like a death sentence. It was the voice of an algorithm, a system that had already calculated the odds and found them wanting. For a long, frozen moment, neither Anya nor Elias moved. The hunter had found them. The quiet, bureaucratic machine she had defied now had a face, and it was the sleek, black hull of a Phantom-class scout ship, a vessel designed for one purpose: to make problems disappear. Elias was the first to break the silence. He didn't swear or panic. A strange, grim calm settled over him as he stared at the tactical display where the Federation ship glowed, a single, malevolent red icon. He had run from the Federation his entire life, playing a cat-and-mouse game in the margins. The game had just ended. "Well," he said, his voice a low rumble. "So much for disappearing." He looked over at Anya. "Your little data bomb didn't just piss off the bugs. It woke up the exterminators. They couldn't have tracked us through the nebula," Anya said, her mind racing, sifting through possibilities, looking for the logical flaw in their predicament. "Our energy signature was non-existent. The sublight hops were random. There's no trail to follow." "They didn't follow a trail," Elias growled, his fingers drumming a frantic, silent rhythm on the dead console. "They were waiting for us." He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "That's not a random patrol. They knew where we were going." Someone talked. "Anya, someone on the sync knew you were looking for a ride off station." The betrayal was a cold stone in her gut. She had been so careful, so meticulous in her digital world, but in the messy, human world of whispers and favors, she had made a mistake. A single loose thread had unraveled everything. The synthesized voice returned, impatient, its lack of emotion more terrifying than any threat. "Nomad, you have 30 seconds to comply. Non-compliance will be met with terminal force." The Black Scout ship shifted, its weapon ports sliding open with silent, deadly precision. It wasn't a bluff. The Echo, the ghost station that was supposed to be their sanctuary, was about to become their tomb. A new voice crackled over the comm. This one human, laced with static and the gravelly tones of a lifetime spent breathing recycled air. It came from the station itself. "Federation Scout, this is Echo Actual. You are in unauthorized territory. This is a non-aligned, sovereign system. Power down your weapons and state your intentions." It was a brave, foolish gesture. A mouse roaring at a hawk. The Federation ship didn't even deign to reply. Instead, it fired. Not at the Nomad, but at the Echo. A single precise lance of blue-white energy shot out and struck one of the station's main docking arms. The arm, already brittle with age and neglect, vaporized in a silent, brilliant flash of light. The ship that had been clamped to it, a rusty cargo hauler, was thrown clear, tumbling helplessly into the void. It was a demonstration of power, a casual act of destruction that said more than words ever could. Your rules do not apply here. Your sovereignty is a fiction. Elias, Anya said, her voice barely a whisper. They're going to destroy the station to get to us. That was the moment everything shifted for Elias Vance. This was no longer just about him and his ship. The Echo was a haven for people like him, the outcasts, the forgotten, the ones who had fallen through the cracks of the Federation's pristine, orderly society. It was a community of ghosts, and the Federation was about to exorcise them all. He slammed his hand on the comm panel, opening a channel not to the Federation, but to the station. Echo Actual. This is the Nomad. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. Get your people to the blast shelters. I'm drawing them off. He turned to Anya, his eyes burning with a desperate, reckless fire she hadn't seen before. There's one last trick this old girl has, a full reactor flush. We can vent the entire plasma coolant supply through the main thrusters. It'll generate a massive, uncontrolled burn. It won't be fast. It won't be elegant. But for about 90 seconds, we'll move like a bat out of hell. And after 90 seconds, Anya asked, already knowing the answer. After 90 seconds, he said with a grim smile, the engines will melt, the reactor will go critical, and the Nomad will become a very small, very bright star. But it'll buy the station time, and it'll get us into the belt. He was pointing at the densest part of the asteroid field, a chaotic, churning maelstrom of rock and ice that no sane pilot would ever enter. It was suicide, but it was a different kind of suicide than waiting to be executed. Do it, Anya said, her voice firm. There was no other choice. Elias's hands flew across the engineering console, bypassing safety protocols and overriding governors that screamed in protest. Red lines shot across the diagnostic screen as he manually opened the coolant valves. A deep, violent shudder ran through the entire ship, a beast waking from its deathbed for one final roar. On the viewport, the Federation scout, likely surprised by their sudden power surge, began to charge its main weapon for the killing blow. Too late. With a deafening shriek of tortured metal, the Nomad launched forward. It wasn't a graceful acceleration, it was a detonation. Anya was thrown back into her seat, the G-forces crushing the air from her lungs. The ship careened toward the asteroid field, a runaway comet trailing a brilliant plume of incandescent plasma. The scout fired, but its shot went wide, unable to track the Nomad's insane, kamikaze trajectory. For 90 seconds, Elias was no longer a smuggler, he was a master, a virtuoso of chaos. He didn't pilot the ship, he aimed it. He spun and dodged, using the random, tumbling asteroids as shields, their ship a blur of motion against the backdrop of silent, uncaring rock. The alarms on the bridge screamed a final, unified chorus of imminent, total system failure. The lights flickered and died for the last time. Brace for impact, Elias yelled over the roar of the dying reactor. The ship slammed into a massive, iron-rich asteroid. The impact was an apocalypse of sound and force. Metal screamed, buckled, and tore. Anya's world dissolved into a cacophony of shattering glass and collapsing bulkheads before darkness swallowed her whole. She awoke to silence, a profound, absolute silence that was more disorienting than the chaos that had preceded it. She was floating in zero gravity, her body tangled in a web of severed cables. A single thin beam of light from a crack in the hull cut through the darkness, illuminating a scene of utter devastation. The entire front half of the Nomad was gone, sheared away. What was left was a mangled, airless tomb, open to the void. Elias was strapped into his chair, motionless. His face was pale, a network of small cuts crisscrossing his forehead. But he was breathing. The impact had knocked him unconscious. Anya, her own body a symphony of aches and bruises, pushed herself off the ceiling and floated over to him. She checked his vitals, her fingers trembling. He was alive. The ship's emergency transponder, a device designed to activate on catastrophic impact, was beeping faintly, a tiny, pathetic pulse in the vast silence. It was a death sentence. The Federation scout, now carefully navigating the edges of the asteroid field, would home in on that signal and finish the job. She had to shut it down. She found the transponder box near the aft bulkhead, its casing cracked, but the light still blinking. As she reached for it, her hand brushed against a small, sealed container tucked into the wall, the ship's black box. Its data recorder, an idea, desperate and insane, sparked in her mind. She couldn't save themselves. The Nomad was a coffin. But she could change the narrative one last time. She could leave behind a different kind of ghost. Working with a frantic urgency, she pried open the black box's access panel. Its internal power was still active. Using a small, handheld interface from her emergency kit, she jacked directly into its memory core. She didn't have time to be subtle. She dumped the entire, unedited Project Sundown file into the black box's primary memory. Then, she took a recording the synthesized, menacing voice of the Federation ship demanding their surrender, and the sound of it firing on the echo. A neutral station. She spliced it all together. A final, damning testament. It was no longer just a leak. It was a confession, a record of the Federation's brutal tactics, and it was now logged as the Nomad's final moments. She sealed the box and reactivated the transponder, but with a modification. She set it to broadcast on a wide, open, civilian frequency, not the encrypted military channel it was supposed to use. It was a message in a bottle, thrown into the cosmic ocean, a final act of defiance. Just as she finished, Elias began to stir, groaning as consciousness returned. "Anya, what happened? We crashed," she said, her voice strained. "But we're not done yet." As if on cue, a new sound echoed through the ruined hull. A metallic scraping, followed by the hiss of a plasma torch cutting through the exterior wall. The Federation hadn't bothered with an airlock. They were carving their way in. Elias struggled against his restraints. "They're here." "I know," Anya said. She looked at the black box, then at him. "They can't find this. They can't know what I did." There was only one way. The black box was designed to be jettisoned, to survive the destruction of its parent ship. She hit the emergency release. With a small, pneumatic hiss, the box shot out of its housing, through a ruptured section of the hull, and vanished into the darkness of the asteroid field. It was gone. A tiny, anonymous speck carrying a galaxy-shattering truth, now tumbling through the void on a random, untraceable course. The plasma torch cut the final section of the hull away. A section of the wall fell inward with a clang, revealing two figures silhouetted against the nebula's light. They were clad in black, form-fitting environmental suits, their faces obscured by reflective visors. They held pulse rifles leveled at them. the very picture of merciless efficiency. One of the figures raised a hand, and a voice, human this time, cold and professional, came through their helmets. Elias Vance, Anya Sharma, you are designated as enemies of the state. Surrender and you will be taken for processing. Elias let out a weak, defiant laugh. Processing, is that what you call it now? The soldier didn't respond. He simply took a step forward. But before he could take another, a new light flooded the ruined bridge. It wasn't from the Federation ship. It came from behind them, from deeper within the asteroid. A set of powerful searchlights cut through the darkness, pinning the two Federation soldiers in their glare. A voice, loud and amplified, boomed through the void, carried on a tight beam frequency that made the hull vibrate. Federation commandos, drop your weapons. You are trespassing. This is our home. You are not welcome. The two soldiers spun around, momentarily blinded. Anya and Elias craned their necks to see the source of the voice. Clamped to the far side of the asteroid, previously hidden from view, was another ship. It was a patchwork monster, a Frankenstein's creation of salvaged parts from a dozen different vessels, all welded onto the frame of an old, heavy-duty mining barge. It was ugly, asymmetrical, and bristling with oversized, jury-rigged weapon emplacements. It was a junk hauler that had been turned into a battleship. The people of the Echo were not mice. They were survivors. And they were done running. A volley of solid projectiles, likely repurposed mining charges, shot from the junker ship. They weren't elegant plasma bolts. They were brutal, physical rounds that slammed into the Federation scout ship, tearing through its shields and punching deep into its hull. The sleek, black hunter convulsed as internal explosions rocked it from within. The two commandos, seeing their ship crippled, made a split-second decision. They weren't soldiers fighting for a cause. They were operatives on a mission. The mission had failed. They fired their jetpacks and retreated, vanishing back into the darkness. On the junker ship, a large cargo bay door hissed open. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the light from within. It was the man from the comms. Echo Actual. He raised a hand in a gesture that was both a greeting and a summons. Nomad. The voice boomed again. Looks like you could use a lift. The rescue was as brutal and pragmatic as the ship that performed it. There were no gentle tractor beams or carefully extended docking tubes. A heavy-duty magnetic grappling claw, scarred and pitted from decades of hauling asteroids, clamped onto the mangled remains of the Nomad's hull with a violent, bone-jarring thud. The junker ship, which Anya learned was called the Scrap Heap, reeled them in like a fisherman pulling a dead catch from the depths. They were dragged across the void and into the cavernous, poorly lit cargo bay, the tortured shriek of metal on metal echoing through the open space. The bay smelled of welding fumes, unrefined fuel, and the faint, coppery scent of old blood. It wasn't a military hangar. It was a workshop, a garage, and a battlefield morgue all in one. Figures emerged from the shadows, not soldiers in crisp uniforms, but a motley collection of men and women clad in patched-up pressure suits and worn oil-stained coveralls. They carried heavy industrial tools that looked suspiciously like weapons and moved with the wary, efficient grace of people long accustomed to living on the edge of disaster. Their leader, the man who had called himself Echo Actual, stepped forward. He was a mountain of a man named Kalen, his face a landscape of scar tissue, with a cybernetic eye that glowed with a soft crimson light. He pulled off his helmet, revealing a bald head and a grim, tight-lipped expression. He wasn't a commander, he was a foreman, a patriarch to this lost tribe of cosmic castaways. His gaze fell upon Anya and Elias, who were being helped out of their ruined cockpit by two of his crew. He looked them over, his crimson eye whirring faintly as it scanned them. "You two have a real talent for kicking hornets' nests," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that seemed to emanate from his chest. "First the Vex, now the Feds. You don't do things by halves." Elias, leaning heavily on one of the crew members, managed a weak grin. "We aim to please. Thanks for the save. They were about to process us. They fired on my station," Kalen said, the words flat and cold. "They made it personal. We don't have much out here, but what we have, we protect. We don't kneel." He turned his attention to Anya. "You're the one who sent the message, the data archivist. We've been monitoring your work. The Federation has been scrubbing your name from every database in the sector, which means you're either very dangerous or very important." "Which is it? Does it matter?" Anya asked, her body protesting every small movement. "They're not going to stop. That scout ship was just the beginning. They'll send a fleet next. They'll sterilize this whole belt to keep their secrets buried." Kalen nodded slowly, his cybernetic eye focusing on her with unnerving intensity. "That's what I figured." He gestured to the gaping hole in the scrap heap's bay, where the Federation scout ship, now a crippled, powerless hulk, was also being dragged in by grappling lines. "Which is why we're not just saving you. We're salvaging our future." The next few days were a blur of controlled chaos. The Echo was not a single station. Anya learned it was a small, self-sufficient community scattered across a dozen interconnected asteroids, all linked by a network of tunnels and short-range shuttlecraft. The original relay station 734 was merely the heart, the central hub of a hidden, thriving ecosystem of outcasts. They were engineers, miners, rogue scientists, and deserters from both the Federation and the Vex. They were the galaxy's unwanted, and they had turned their exile into a fortress. While Kalen's medical team, a gruff ex-Federation doctor with a penchant for black market cybernetics, patched up Anya and Elias. The rest of the community descended upon the captured Phantom scout ship like locusts. They were master salvagers, artists of repurposing. They stripped the Federation vessel of everything valuable, its advanced sensor arrays, its powerful shield generators, its military-grade comm suite, and, most importantly, its hyperdrive core. Under the direction of a wiry, caffeine-addicted engineer named Lena, they began the impossible task of retrofitting the advanced Federation technology into the crude, brutal framework of the scrap heap. It was, as she put it, like trying to shove a racing engine into a tractor. But they were determined. The Federation thinks in terms of doctrines and tactics. Kalen explained to Anya as they stood on an observation deck overlooking the salvage operation. The deck was a bubble of reinforced plasteel bolted to the side of an asteroid, offering a breathtaking, terrifying view of the Charybdis belt. They believe that superior technology guarantees victory. They can't comprehend a mindset that sees a mining laser as a cannon, a cargo hauler as a carrier, and a captured enemy ship as a spare parts depot. They're not just fighting a ship, Anya realized, watching the organized frenzy below. They're fighting an ecosystem. Exactly, Kalen said, a flicker of something like pride in his voice. They can bomb a station, but they can't bomb an idea. And the idea out here is simple survive, at any cost. While the engineers worked, Anya was given access to the Echo's comms center, a cramped room deep within the central asteroid, shielded by 20 meters of solid rock. It was a patchwork of old and new tech, but it was surprisingly powerful. The community had been intercepting and decrypting communications across the sector for years. They showed her what was happening in the galaxy she had set on fire. The Vex civil war was escalating. The Cathar, fueled by the leaked data of Federation collusion, were staging successful rebellions, fracturing the Concordate's once monolithic empire. The Federation, meanwhile, was in full damage control mode. They publicly condemned the Vex infighting while secretly deploying fleets to stabilize the contested territories, the very same territories outlined in Project Sundown. They were using the chaos Anya had created as a cover to achieve their original goal. It was a brilliant, cynical geopolitical pivot, and it made Anya's blood run cold. They hadn't been stopped, they had merely been forced to change their methods. And then there was the other matter, the Nomad's black box. Kalen's deep space sensors had tracked its trajectory. It was tumbling through a remote, uninhabited sector on a long, slow journey to nowhere. But its signal, the open, repeating broadcast of the Federation's attack, was causing ripples. Civilian freighters in independent colonies were picking it up. It was being dismissed by the Federation as a fabricated distress call, a clever piece of anti-government propaganda. But the story was spreading. It had become a ghost story, a whispered legend among the spacers and fringe dwellers about the phantom ship Nomad and its dying testament. The Federation was hunting for it. Desperate to silence the ghost, Elias, now mostly recovered, found Anya in the comm center, staring at a star chart that tracked the black box's projected path. He had a new look in his eyes, a sense of purpose that had replaced his old, weary cynicism. The destruction of his ship, his home, had severed the last tie to his old life. He was no longer a man on the run. He was a man with a score to settle. "They're turning us into a myth," he said, looking at the screen. "Myths are hard to kill," Anya replied, "but they're easy to ignore. It's not enough. A story isn't proof. We need to get that box. Kalen won't risk his people on a wild goose chase," Elias said. "His fight is here, defending this place." "I know," Anya said, turning to him. "That's why we have to go. Just the two of us." Elias raised an eyebrow. "In what to the Nomad is space dust. And I don't think Kalen is in the business of lending out his ships. He is if we can offer him something he needs more than ships," Anya said, a plan forming in her mind. A high-stakes gamble built on logic and desperation. The Federation's scout ship, its central computer core, is still intact. Lena's team can't crack its final encryption layer, but I can. Inside that core is everything Federation fleet movements, security protocols, patrol routes. It's a complete intelligence package. It's the key to the Echo's long-term survival. She paused, letting the weight of her offer sink in. "We give Kalen the keys to the kingdom. In exchange, he gives us a ride." The negotiation was tense. Kalen was a pragmatist, not a revolutionary. His priority was the safety of his people, not a galactic crusade. He listened to Anya's proposal in the scrap heap's makeshift command center, his crimson eye fixed on her, weighing her words. "You want me to give you a long-range scout ship, fully fueled and supplied, so you can chase a ghost across the galaxy. All for a box of data that might not even exist anymore, he asked, his voice skeptical. It's not just a box. Elias interjected, stepping forward. It's proof. It's the one thing that can turn this from a fringe rebellion into a galactic incident. It's the truth. You said yourself the Federation can't bomb an idea. Well, that box is an idea that's about to go supernova. Anya laid out the final piece of her argument. The data in that core will let you see the Federation coming from 1,000 light years away. You can evade their patrols, ambush their supply lines, and predict their every move. It will make this place truly safe. But long-term, safety isn't enough. Sooner or later, they will find a way to crush you. Your only real hope is for the Federation itself to become unstable, to be so consumed with its own internal scandals that it can no longer afford to hunt down ghosts in the dark. That black box is your real shield. Kalen was silent for a long time, the only sound the hum of the scrap heap's newly installed and dangerously powerful hyperdrive. He looked from Anya's determined face to Elias's newfound fire, and then at the tactical display showing the ever-present threat of the Federation. Lena, he finally said, speaking into the comm, get the Stardust prepped for a long-range run. Give them whatever they need. The Stardust was one of the Echo's scout ships, a small, fast vessel designed for asteroid prospecting, now retrofitted with salvaged Federation sensors and a surprisingly powerful engine. It was cramped, ugly, and perfect. As they prepared to leave, Kalen met them at the docking bay. He handed Anya a military-grade datapad, far more advanced than her own. This is linked to our network. We'll be watching. You find that box. You send us a copy of the data before you do anything else. No heroics. Just the truth. He then turned to Elias and handed him a heavy, well-maintained pulse pistol. You brought the storm to my doorstep. Vance, I expect you to make sure it rains on the right people. As the Stardust pulled away from the Echo, a tiny, determined spark heading back into the vast, hostile darkness. Anya looked back at the hidden community. She had come here seeking a refuge and had instead found an alliance. She had started a war of shadows and whispers, but now it was about to become something more. The hunt for the Nomad's black box was no longer just about clearing their names or avenging the dead. It was about recovering the one weapon that could hold an empire accountable. It was a race for the truth, and the finish line was somewhere in the cold, silent, and unforgiving heart of the void. The journey to find the ghost of the Nomad was a pilgrimage into silence. For weeks, the Stardust sliced through the unfeeling void, a tiny, insignificant vessel chasing an even tinier signal. The intelligence from the Echo's new network proved invaluable. Anya and Elias skirted Federation patrols and avoided known Vex skirmish zones, flying a long, dark, and lonely path. The cramped cockpit became their universe. They spoke little. Their shared purpose, a silent bond forged in fire and desperation. Elias piloted with a newfound intensity. No longer the weary cynic, but a man with a singular focus. Anya, meanwhile, became the galaxy's most wanted historian, sifting through the data streams Kalen fed them, watching as the Federation's propaganda machine worked tirelessly to paint them as terrorists and the Vex as victims of a human-instigated proxy war. The truth was a casualty, and they were chasing its last echo. They found it in the Sargasso Nebula, a cosmic graveyard where the currents of hyperspace had for millennia drag dead and dying ships. It was a breathtaking, horrifying spectacle, the skeletal remains of ancient colony ships, the shattered hulls of forgotten warships, and the silent, drifting husks of freighters, all caught in a slow, silent dance of decay. And there, amidst the metallic titans, was the faint, steady pulse of the Nomad's black box, a tiny firefly in a forest of corpses. As they closed in, the box came into view, a small scorched container tumbling end over end, its blinking light a defiant heartbeat in the vast cemetery. Elias expertly maneuvered the stardust alongside it, the ship's small robotic arm extending to gently retrieve their prize. For a moment, a profound sense of triumph filled the cockpit. They had it. They had the truth. The moment was shattered by a proximity alert that shrieked through the bridge. The universe outside the viewport seemed to shimmer, and then a vessel materialized from the darkness as if peeling itself away from the fabric of space. It was another Phantom-class scout, but this one was different. Its hull was a deeper, more absolute black, and it bore a single, chilling insignia, a stylized, silent bird of prey. The comm crackled to life, and a new voice filled the air, not synthesized, but human, calm, and laced with a chilling, intellectual arrogance. Anya Sharma. Elias Vance. A commendable effort. You've led me on quite a chase. The Federation ship, the Silence, hailed them. On their screen, the face of their hunter appeared. He was a man in a crisp, black uniform with sharp, severe features and eyes that held the cold, detached curiosity of a scientist studying insects. I am Agent Corvus, Federation Internal Security. I am here to correct a variable. Your ghost story has become an inefficient narrative. It is time to erase it. Corvus wasn't a soldier. He was a cleaner, the Federation's ultimate solution to messy problems. He hadn't followed them. He had calculated their destination, anticipating that they would be drawn to the very thing he was sent to destroy. The Silence's weapon ports slid open. The Stardust was outmatched, outgunned, and caught in a trap light years from any help. Elias's hands whitened on the controls, his knuckles stark against the dim light of the console. I can't outrun him. Anya, not in this ship. They were trapped. But as Anya looked out at the graveyard of ships, her eyes fell on a colossal structure at the heart of the nebula, a derelict deep space communications relay, one of the first humanity had ever built. A massive dish antenna aimed at a galaxy that had long since forgotten it. It was a relic, an antique, but its power core, she knew from old schematics, would still hold a residual charge, an idea, wild and desperate, ignited in her mind. We don't have to outrun him, she said, her voice electric with a sudden, terrible clarity. We just have to be louder. She pointed to the ancient relay. That's our weapon. If we can get the black box's data to that relay and overload its broadcast system, we can turn its last message into a shout that the entire sector will hear. We can bypass the Federation's networks and broadcast the truth on every open civilian channel at once. Elias stared at the relay, then back at the closing silence. He understood immediately. The power core is dead. It would take a massive energy surge to activate the broadcast array, more than this ship could generate in a year. The ship doesn't have to generate it, Anya said softly. It just has to deliver it. Their eyes met in a moment of perfect, tragic understanding. The Stardust's engine, when overloaded, would release more than enough energy. It was a suicide mission. There would be no escape. Elias didn't flinch. The weary smuggler who had only ever fought for himself was gone. He looked at Anya and gave her a sad, determined smile. You were right, Anya. Fire is all they understand. Just make sure the whole galaxy sees the bonfire. What followed was a final, desperate act of rebellion, as Elias pushed the stardust into a weaving, frantic flight through the wreckage, drawing the silence's fire. Anya worked with a speed she didn't know she possessed. She hardwired the black box directly into the ship's comm system, stripping away safety protocols and turning the entire vessel into a makeshift broadcast antenna. The plan was simple. Elias would fly the stardust directly into the relay's main power conduit, while Anya transmitted the data packet at the precise moment of impact. The ship's exploding core would provide the power, and the relay would provide the voice. Corvus. Anya transmitted, her voice cutting through the chaos. You told me you were here to correct a variable, but you've made a classic miscalculation. You think the truth is a weakness, but the truth isn't a variable. It's a constant. On the screen, Corvus's calm facade finally cracked, replaced by a flash of fury. He realized what they were about to do. The silence surged forward, its cannons firing with renewed intensity, bolts of plasma searing the stardust's hull. Alarms screamed, the cockpit filled with smoke. Through the failing viewport, the ancient relay loomed, a metal giant waiting to receive its final message. It's been an honor, Anya. Elias grunted, his hand steady on the controls as he aimed their small, dying ship at the heart of the machine. Make it loud, was all she could say. Her fingers flying over the console, the upload sequence initiated. The final 30 seconds were an eternity. The world dissolved into a blur of light, sound, and the final defiant roar of an engine being pushed past its limits. Anya hit send a microsecond before the impact, and then silence. A blinding white light. Nothing. But across the galaxy, something extraordinary happened. On the bridge of a Federation cruiser, the tactical display was suddenly replaced by the final, damning recording from the Nomad. In a back alley bar on a forgotten moon, patrons stared as the face of a bruised but defiant prisoner named Grant filled the news screen, followed by footage of a Vex massacre. On the capital world of a neutral system, senators watched in stunned silence as the full, unredacted text of Project Sundown scrolled across their private data feeds. For one moment, the carefully constructed lies of the Galactic Federation were torn away, and the raw, ugly truth was broadcast for all to see. The ghost of the Nomad had finally spoken, and its voice was a thunderclap that shook the foundations of power. Adrift in the wreckage, inside the jettisoned and armored cockpit of the Stardust, Anya awoke. Elias was beside her, unconscious but alive, the ship's final act having thrown them clear of the blast. They were alone, powerless, adrift in a graveyard of forgotten histories. It felt like the end. But then, the datapad Kalen had given her flickered to life. A single message appeared on the screen. It was from the Echo. Message received. The galaxy is listening. A moment later, another signal blinked onto the screen. It wasn't from the Echo. It was an encrypted signature from a colony in a sector they had never heard of. It contained a simple message. We hear you. We are not alone. Then another came, and another, and another. A map of the sector materialized on the screen, and Dozens. Then hundreds of tiny lights began to appear, pinpricks of defiance in the overwhelming darkness, all acknowledging the nomad signal. They were the forgotten, the erased, the decommissioned. And they were waking up. Anya looked out at the field of dead ships, at the distant, uncaring stars. She had started this journey to send a message. Now, the galaxy was finally talking back. The war wasn't over. The war had just begun.